Decades of American dominance in agriculture are collapsing faster than anyone thought possible. Contracts once signed in ink are being torn apart in silence. Ships that once sailed effortlessly now sit stalled in ports, waiting for approvals that never come. In just a handful of years, 7 of America's closest partners, from its neighbors to its biggest buyers, have quietly walked away. And they didn't just leave the table, they chose someone else. That someone was Canada. For American farmers, it's not just lost sales. It's grain rotting in silos. It's small towns watching their lifelines vanish. It's livestock feed running dry and bread missing from tables. Because when nations abandon U.S. corn, they're not just buying from another country. They're voting with trust, with stability, and with food security. And if you think this is just about trade, wait until you see how deep the fracture goes. The unraveling began with a single phone call in the middle of the night. Cairo, 3 a.m. An Egyptian grain buyer, his voice tired but steady, called to cancel the largest corn contract his country had signed in 5 years. The reason wasn't cost, it wasn't quality. It was something far more dangerous: uncertainty. For decades, Egypt had depended on American corn to power everything from livestock feed to the flatbread that keeps over 100 million people alive. Illinois and Iowa shipments were as dependable as the sunrise. But when trade wars erupted and midnight tweets from Washington could dissolve contracts in seconds, Egypt realized its food supply was being held hostage to politics. The breaking point came when a routine shipment was delayed for 2 weeks over new documentation requirements. Egyptian bakeries began rationing flour while their corn sat untouched in U.S. ports. That was when Canada stepped in. No drama, no surprises, just reliable grain with 5-year contracts, transparent pricing, and schedules that never shifted with the political winds. Egypt tested one Canadian shipment. It arrived on time, perfectly documented, with grain calibrated exactly to their milling equipment. Efficiency rose, waste dropped, and within 18 months, the United States wasn't even in the conversation. A 30-year relationship ended not with an argument, but with silence. Thousands of miles away, South Korea was facing a different frustration. In a country where everything runs on precision and technology, Korean importers found themselves dealing with paperwork from American suppliers that looked like it belonged in a museum. Handwritten forms, scattered records, tracking systems that simply stopped once the grain left American soil. At Busan Port, inspectors spent weeks verifying shipments that should have cleared in hours. Korean factories, designed for efficiency, sat idle while inspectors played detective. Then they compared it to Canada. Canadian shipments arrived with QR codes that traced every kernel back to the exact field where it was grown. Blockchain verification, instant digital documentation, moisture content, protein levels, and contamination tests available at the touch of a smartphone. The difference wasn't just convenience. It was survival in an economy built on speed. Korean manufacturers realized they didn't just need grain. They needed certainty. Canada gave them that certainty. The United States didn't. Within 2 years, South Korea had rebuilt its entire supply chain around Canadian corn. The U.S. didn't lose that customer to politics. It lost them to technological obsolescence. In Vietnam, the problem was different again. Farmers in the Mekong Delta were just drowning in volatility. Every time relations between Washington and Beijing soured, feed costs soared. Shipments were delayed. Prices, well, they fluctuated with political moods, not agricultural fundamentals. Shrimp farms couldn't plan breeding cycles. Fish exporters couldn't sign contracts 6 months out because, honestly, they had no idea what feed would cost. And when U.S. trade disputes spilled into Vietnamese seafood exports, the frustration really reached a breaking point. Vietnamese buyers tested Canadian suppliers and found something kind of revolutionary: neutrality. Canadian contracts weren't tied to Washington or Beijing. Prices were fixed, predictable, and insulated from all that global political theater. Farmers could finally plan ahead. The transformation, it was dramatic. Aquaculture survival rates improved. Productivity jumped by over 20%. And in less than 3 years, Vietnam went from majority U.S. imports to nearly 90% Canadian. What started as a quiet pivot became a regional revolution in supply chain independence. Saudi Arabia's decision sent shockwaves far beyond agriculture. For decades, the kingdom imported nearly all of its food through U.S.-controlled systems. But behind closed doors, Saudi planners admitted something pretty terrifying. A single U.S. policy change could empty their grain silos in weeks. The breaking point came when shipments were delayed for enhanced screenings. screenings that felt more like political theater than genuine security. For Saudi Arabia, a nation that imports 85% of its food, the risk was just unacceptable. Canada offered them independence, grain routed through Canadian ports, financed outside U.S. banks, untouched by American politics. The deal included backup routes, desert-ready packaging, and blockchain verification. It wasn't just commerce, it was strategy. And for the Saudis, it worked. Canadian grain became the backbone of their food security, reinforced by billions in joint investments, storage facilities, and desert agriculture research. America hadn't just lost a customer, it had lost influence over one of the world's most strategic powers. But the deepest cut came closer to home. For over 70 years, Mexico had been more than a customer. It was family. Cross-border grain trade was so routine it barely made the news. Tortillas, livestock, food processing, all built on American corn. But family depends on trust. And trust collapsed when U.S. political disputes spilled directly into agriculture. Tariff threats tied to immigration, trade agreements rewritten with little warning, and finally, corn shipments delayed at the border for weeks while tortilla factories rationed supplies. For Mexico, it was more than an inconvenience. It was a humiliation. Then came Canada's offer. Contracts shielded from politics, shipments guaranteed regardless of diplomatic disputes. The first pilot shipment arrived flawless. Mexico's food industry realized they had a safer partner to the north. When your closest neighbor walks away, the rest of the world notices. Japan didn't leave because of politics. They left because of standards. In a country where even a fraction of a percent can make or break a product, American corn proved just too inconsistent. Moisture levels fluctuated, protein content varied. Shipments just couldn't meet the rigid tolerances of Japan's precision-driven food industry. Canada, however, delivered perfection. Every shipment matched specifications down to the decimal points. Moisture and protein levels were consistent, verified multiple times before delivery. Japanese companies could build production schedules with absolute confidence. The cultural fit was, honestly, perfect. Canada's precision farming aligned seamlessly with Japan's precision economy. Within 4 years, U.S. exports were replaced by long-term Canadian partnerships, not just for corn, but for joint research, innovation, and new grain varieties. Then came the earthquake China. Beijing realized that despite buying grain from multiple countries, it was still dangerously exposed to American politics. A single United States decision could disrupt food for 1.4 billion people. For a rising superpower, that was just, well, unacceptable. Canada offered something no one else could: scale, independence, and Arctic shipping routes that bypassed American influence entirely. The first Canadian deal covered millions of tons. Then came joint research, new trade infrastructure, and shared development under the Belt and Road Initiative. Within 3 years, United States soybean and corn exports to China collapsed by over 70%. And as China encouraged its partners across Africa, Asia, and beyond to follow its lead, the ripple effects spread worldwide. America hadn't just lost its biggest customer, it had lost its place as the cornerstone of global food security. From Egypt to South Korea, from Mexico to China, 7 nations walked away, each for different reasons: uncertainty, obsolescence, politics, or precision. But all pointed to the same truth: American agriculture is no longer indispensable. The question now is simple: if America can lose its closest allies, what's left to hold on to? Because this isn't just about grain, it's about power, it's about security, and it's about whether a superpower can stay a superpower when the world no longer needs its breadbasket. If this opened your eyes to the collapse of American agricultural dominance, make sure to subscribe, because the next chapter of this global shift hasn't even begun.